We are live. We are live, everyone.
Thank God, because normally we're not. So that's a good thing.
That's why this is called Raw Live. With all the errors, no edits, people can see how it's happening. All live. We are live on YouTube, and I will now invite you to our guest on Raw Live. On Raw Live today, with your host, Rohit Bassi, we talk to our guest who is something else. Since a child, he has been fascinated by those who achieve greatness. He discovered through experience that mindset, more than background or circumstance, was one of the biggest determinants of personal and professional fulfillment for many people. Armed with that insight, he wanted to understand how he could empower others to reach their highest potential. So he chose to pursue psychology. Yes, he's a psychologist, a professional psychologist. In doing so, he learned that helping people was his calling and that he could leave a trail of happiness behind him in everything he does. As a peak performance coach for over 20 years, he facilitates workshops and coaching sessions around the world to equip his clients with the skills they need to achieve their dreams and see a brighter future for themselves. Our wonderful guest today on Raw Life today with your host, Rohit Bassi, is the marvelous Gaj Ravichandra, who serves you in paving the way to your dream career. Thank you, Gaj, for being here and bringing this topic up of the now and future of work.
Absolute pleasure to be here, Rohit. You know what it's like when we get together. I don't know what's going to happen over this discussion, but let's see where it takes us.
Well, this is going to be a very, very interesting session because we are going to start with some very, very difficult questions, and then we'll go to the easy questions. Are we ready, Gaj?
Let's do this. Okay.
So my first question to you is, before we go into the deep dive into the now and future of work, my first question is, it has been said that George Clooney stole your look from you. The question that comes up is that the reason you stopped coaching him?
No, that's not the reason. Brad Pitt asked me to start coaching him, and that's why, George, I just couldn't. It was a conflict of interest. So it was a very unfortunate situation. But interestingly, there is a connection between George Clooney and me.
Okay.
Which not many people know maybe, but he actually was in this movie called Up in the Air. Do you remember that movie?
Yes.
Yeah. He used to go and fire people. That was his job. And so when I first started in psychology as an intern, I actually used to do that. I used to go and help corporates to let go of people. So we used to go and have those conversations, have that separation, interview, discussion, all of those things used to happen. So that's the closest I've ever gotten to George Clooney, I think.
Okay. So now I see the big connection over there. Now let's me ask you the next difficult question.
Yeah.
I heard you were up for being the new James Bond. What made you refuse to take that role?
Because I had to go topless in a scene, and I wasn't very happy about that. So yeah, I just didn't. I couldn't do it.
Is that the only reason? Was it because your missus would have been upset because of that?
I think she would have loved the premiere tickets. I don't think that would have been a problem.
It was your own self.
Correct.
I see. So there, your James Bond gone down the drain over there. Okay. Now, here's the third difficult question, and then we go into the easy part of this. Being an Australian, how many koalas, crocodiles, and kangaroos have you coached to their success?
Well, if we're talking figuratively, then I've coached a lot, because there are a lot of crocodiles in the business world, as you and I know.
Yes.
And also a lot of koalas, a lot of furry, cuddly people, love to get hugs and very highly empathic and all the rest of it. So look, I think there are. It's really funny. We could probably use that analogy as we go through today in terms of personality styles, right? But look, I think I'd love to spend some more time coaching Australian wildlife. That would be amazing.
Thank you very much, guys, that you've answered the difficult questions, and we'll bring up the kangaroos, the koalas, and the crocodiles throughout this session because they will be coming up in one way or the other. Now, the
Yes.
topic we discussed about this, and you said that you want to bring up this topic, the now and future of work. My first question to you is, why is this extremely crucial at this point in the history of business, of work, of livelihood?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, I thought about this topic a lot, and you know, firstly, thank you, you know, for the opportunity to come on here and have this discussion. Um, Over the last 5 to 6 months, you know, as everything has started to happen around the world with regards to COVID-19, there has been a lot of confusion and anxiety, right, about where the world is going. And I listened to, you know, your last guest, Dion Jensen, talk a lot about the mental health issues, you know, last week. And, you know, a lot of the things that he talks about obviously have been accelerated, right, over what's happened, you know, over the last 5 to 6 months in most Western countries around the world and also Eastern countries. And as a result of that, thought it would be interesting to talk about where is the world of work? What does the research tell us, right,
Hmm,
about where people are going? And
hmm,
what does that mean for what is currently happening right now in terms of a few things? And, you know, of course, you know, from a background in psychology, trying to ensure that we have this balance between the physical and the emotional and the mental side of things is so critical, right? And you know, that sense of connection, what does it mean, you know, going
hmm,
forward? What is connection going to look like and feel like in the kinds of jobs and opportunities that are going to be available? And also around what are the kind of things we need to be thinking about now,
hmm.
right, for the world of work in the not so distant future. Now, everyone has talked about how technology has accelerated, you know, in terms of development over the
Yeah,
last 5 months. What we could have achieved, what we thought we were going to achieve 3 years from now has been achieved within 3 months, right?
hmm,
So, but there's also been other impacts. There's been impacts on our family and the way that society is run, the
yeah,
rules, right? The social rules that we are putting into place. All of these things are having an impact. Even
yeah,
just being able to hop onto a plane and to go somewhere, that ability to think that freely, right,
hmm,
has been challenged over the last half year. And I think those things are what's really interesting for me in terms of what does that mean for us in terms of the work and where work is going. How does that integrate to technology?
hmm.
And where are the opportunities for us, right? This is not a doomsday discussion. In
Yes.
fact, this is about saying, well, if we know that these things are happening, what can we do? What's in our control? And you and I have talked about controlling the controllables before, right?
Hmm,
What's in our control to be able to make that change, right?
hmm. It's interesting you talk about technology and work. I mean, I was just as most of us, you know, over these couple of months, we've been going and been on Netflix, on Amazon, and all of that. And one of the very interesting thing I noticed in all of these is um, these series and these shows and these movies is all about doom and gloom.
Mm.
That the world has come to an end. There is no work, there is no life, and we are just doing survival. I
Mm.
just found that very off-putting. That media,
Mm.
that media is looking at everything from a doom and gloom perspective rather than bringing the stories out in this time of how people are helping each other, especially on the work front. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, it's wonderful in a lot of ways that, you know, technology has allowed us to survive, and Netflix, you know, being a great friend to many people during these kind of challenging times. But of course, a lot of these shows, you know, are driven by their success in terms of how they attach to these primal feelings, right? You know, around anxiety and fear and happiness, right?
Mm,
And love. And so, you know, when, you know, we've got shows that directly are written with those primal emotions at the heart or the core, it is going to appeal to people much more. And I think that's what they've been able to do successfully. Right?
mm,
Now, what does that mean in terms of work? Well, there are a couple of real primal fears that are going to be
mm,
addressed over the next 3 to 5 years. And in fact, I was just looking at some statistics coming out of the Department of Labor in the US, which actually said that over the next 5 years, they're actually expecting about 50% of the workforce to be in what is called the gig economy,
Yeah.
right? And this gig economy, for those listeners out there who are unsure of this, is really a world where there is no permanent work, right? It is actually about contract and temporary projects, right, that people come into and undertake. So if you imagine you're moving out of permanency into impermanence or temporary, right, work, and you are having to work in a project-based environment. Now, for you and me, Rohit, we've been used to this for some time. That's kind of the way in which we operate, right? We have projects and clients, and we work on those kind of measures. But for the vast majority of people, that's not the way that they have seen their work, right? Now, countries are changing, right? So if you look at India, for example, right, the statistics are 40% of people are self-employed, right? Within actually in India. In Uganda, that's 25%. A quarter of the population are self-employed. Vietnam and China, 13% of the people unemployed, self-employed. So you've got this movement already happening towards this. But what does that mean in terms of how we develop our skills, and what do we need to do in terms of work? So if we're moving into this more of this gig economy, there's less permanent roles becoming available. Then it's about our brand. Who are we? How do we sell ourselves in the most effective way, right? And I was looking at this, a lot of this research on Instagram and social media and all these things, saying if you don't have a presence on any of these social media outlets over the next couple of years, you won't exist. People won't be able to find you, all right? And there are a lot of people who are in permanent jobs right now who don't even go to their LinkedIn profile. Might be once a week, might be once a month, right? They might just use their social media to like photos, right? Or to get reminded, as I do, about birthdays of people around me, right? So there has to be a massive shift in the way in which we think about things in terms of how we put our brand forward, because our personal brand is going to have to be elevated, right? In terms of being able to sell ourselves. Now, were you taught how to sell yourself when you were at school?
Never.
Never, right? Were you taught how to manage a business?
Never.
Never.
Although I did business studies, but never how you actually manage a business.
Absolutely, right? These are skills that are missing.
Even to the simple fact is, how do you do a simple budget for your home living, your life living? These skills, as far as I'm aware, from the time I was in school, were never taught. Are they being taught at this moment? I'm not quite sure. Maybe some schools are, maybe some are not. I'm not. And I do understand the schooling system is way, way back in the past. It's not caught up. And that is due to red tape, due to belief systems, or it's don't touch that elephant in the room kind of mentality.
Absolutely. So we've got all these people like you and me who've never been taught these things. We've had to work it out ourselves, right? And we'll talk a little bit about some of those skills that are required, as we move into this new kind of economy, moving away from permanent work to more sort of temporary project-based work. And we've got people like, actually, I love some of the stuff that The Rock, the wrestler, The Rock, the actor, Dwayne Johnson. He just announced a couple of days ago a venture with a company where they are actually going to teach kids how to do these things, how to manage their money, right? It's called $7. That was the name of his production company, because that's all the money that he had in his wallet. And if you go in and sign up to this financial services company, they will put $7 into your child's account, and they will then, part of that process is to educate them about what to do with this money, right? So it's starting to happen. And I think people are starting to realize that there's generations of people who don't have those skills required to kind of then take on this new gig economy type environment, right? And so, we're moving into this kind of world. And the other thing that's happening is then this fractional employment term, right? Which is also an interesting term, which is about, having multiple part-time jobs, right? Sometimes working for competitors at the same time, right? This is unheard of,
Yep.
right? I mean, if you asked somebody 5 years ago that I'm going to be working for Ferrari part-time, and then I'm going to go work for Lamborghini part-time. Now, actually, I don't even know whether they're probably owned by the same people these days. But anyway, if you're working for those two companies, you wouldn't have been allowed to do that. Right? So, but now the world is moving to, well, we're going to hire you for a set job. There are some expectations and requirements
Yep.
around that. And then you're going to have to do that separately here. So that the world is shifting around that. And part of that is around companies not wanting to invest in people in a permanent way.
Yep.
And there's some of the challenges around that. We've seen this with industries, hospitality and leisure. We've seen that with aviation. We've seen it with banking and finance. We've seen
Yep.
it with consulting. We've seen it with education. We've seen it across the board, right? How are we going to then engage and employ people who are coming from these different industries in a way that is more sustainable, right? And this kind of comes back to something about, what can companies do during this time? And I'm sure we'll talk about this, which is about protecting people, not jobs. All right. I know one of your mates that you always talk about, Mr. Tata in India, is a big advocate of this. And we were just talking about this before we went live, right? What is his kind of take on this, Rohit, out of interest?
So it was interesting. This was, I think, a couple of weeks ago where he was interviewed, and the statement, and this is not, can't fully remember what the full statement was, but to simplify it, he said, for all those people who have served you for so many years, where is the empathy, the kindness and compassion when you just kick them out overnight without even considering these people have served you for so many years and have been a part of your success, and you're not looking at the fact that what can you do to minimize the impact on the people who are on the workforce on a day-to-day basis compared to the senior people who are on a greater amount of compensation. Now, this is where he's bringing the part of kindness, compassion, and empathy. And are leaders actually willing to do that? And Ratan Tata is not a small game. He is a global player. He is not a business person. He's an industrialist. So if you look at what he does and the way he connects with his people, and for the people who have worked under his different organizations, of the little I know of how his organizations work, all of them speak very highly of the way they operate, and it's people focused.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because it seems like everyone has got so caught up in what technology we need that we've forgotten what people do we need, right? How do our people need to be present for the future of what we're doing? How do we equip them with the right skills and mindset, right, to be able to do this? We don't just leave people aside and replace them with technology. And in fact, the best investments you see with the companies are actually where you find out what you need, then you find the technology that suits you to help the people achieve the goals that we need to achieve. Not let's put the technology in, then the people work around the technology, right? So, I mean, that's a big shift in how organizations need to kind of think.
It's interesting you say that, because if you look at it, technology is created in the way I view technology, is created for the convenience of humankind, not to remove humankind from the connection from each other, but to build and develop that connection. And yet, when we look at the mass media, and when you look at social media, and even like we were talking about the movies and the TV series which come about, is technology is all about gloom and doom. But I've always seen it as a connection to build and develop human connections. Then how come there is so much focus on technology rather than people? Is it because businesses, leaders are only considering costs.
Mm, mm. That is definitely a primary factor. And you know what's really interesting? I was just reading some stuff from the World Economic Forum that published this research on, what are the essential skills required for people as we start moving into this
Yep.
new world, right? And there were three things that kind of jumped out at me. And this is all about what are the skills for this fourth industrial revolution? What you were saying, Rohit, the way in which technology is able to support us to live our lives in a more convenient way. That is the fourth industrial revolution, right? And we need to do that through that connection. And there are a couple of things really interesting. So the first one was cognitive flexibility.
Okay.
Right? So what does that mean? So cognitive flexibility is being agile, right? This, the overused word of the decade, right? Being agile, which is, can I quickly use my intellect, right? To be able to make decisions based on what's happening around me, right? And that kind of ability to do that and to draw upon information and analyze that information quickly and do that, successfully. Then EQ was the second one, is about that empathic connection with people. How do I demonstrate empathy, with the people around me, right? To make sure that I'm going to be successful there. And the new one that came in, which it was actually quite low on the list back in 2015 when they published the original paper, was creativity, right? The amount of creativity now far supersedes what we need to be doing in many other aspects of what we do at work, right? And so in a combination of the cognitive flexibility that we need, to solve problems, with our emotional connection through empathy that we need to have, and also with the level of creativity that we need to demonstrate, these were three things that kept coming up through that report by the World Economic Forum. And so the more of those kinds of behaviors that we can demonstrate around those, the more successful we'll tend to be, not only as individuals, right? And I think this is where, I hear people all the time talking about this. I am busier now than I was before when I'm at home because I'm going from back-to-back meetings and I'm exhausted, right? I'm hearing this all the time. I'm sure you're receiving this as well, right? And it's this, well, that is not sustainable. We know that. People are getting burnt out. Mental health issues are increasing. Here in Australia, recent report was indicating that there's a 13% increase in suicide they're expecting over the next 3 to 4 years, right? 117,000 people are going to self-harm over the next few years. There's going to be 1.6 million people showing up in emergency departments over the next few years in Australia because of the issues that they'll be facing around mental health, right? So we have a problem, right? And we have an issue. And I think for the first time, we are starting to talk about it more openly, right? People like yourself with Dion last week and other individuals, right, that are coming up are able to now express what is happening to people, where we might have had to hide in the shadows in the past and not talk about these things. We are now being able to do that, right? And only yesterday I was talking to someone from one of the top tier, management consultancies who was so concerned about the mental health of their fellow colleagues around the world that they want to create a mental health program, right? Which doesn't exist. Now, this is one of the top consultancies that advises governments and the United Nations, right, on what they need to do. And they don't have anything in place to protect their employees from the burnout that's going on right now, right? And so these are real issues we've got to deal with. And we've got to come up with these kind of plans to support our employees as we go through this shift.
See, while you're talking, and a thought just came into mind. Are leaders, our organizations, our governments doing this really for the welfare for the people, or are they looking at it from a perspective of how much more performance and how much more money and how much more I can increase my GDP? That's what the perspective we're looking for. What is the perspective they're looking for? Because from what I'm listening and what I see is it's your performance will improve, your productivity will improve, the GDP will increase. But hold on 1 minute. This is all towards a transactional value. But what about just the general wellness of humankind?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there's some friction, right? That's kind of taking place at the moment. There is a friction between the fact that, there's so many people who have, spoken to me, and I know to you as well, saying, I've really enjoyed actually being at home. My family is there. I've
Yeah.
got to see them and spend more time with them. I've seen the value of being able to have that experience, uh, as opposed to organizations that are trying to see, well, how do we keep our level of control and engagement up so that people are still producing the goods that they need, right? So we can turn our profit and our revenue, as consistently as possible. So there is a friction that's kind of being caused, as a result of that. As we move into more of this sort of gig economy and fractional employment, as we spoke
Mm.
about before,
Yep.
it seems that where the research is telling us is that actually there's going to be less reliant on the organization
Mm.
providing those things, and it's
Mm.
going to fall back much more on the individual, right? So the individual is going to have to choose, do I want to have 2 part-time jobs, or do I want to have 3 part-time jobs,
Mm.
right? What are the kind of companies that I want to work for that kind of appreciate the level of connection that's required on a project, right? For example, Google came out recently with a project which was that certificate that you can do now over 6 months that replaces a 4-year degree,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So they're saying, you know what? We know that probably one of the more important skills are things that we can teach you when you're in the job, right? So we'd rather take you, give you some core skills that you need to learn knowledge-wise, then let's get going, right, in the actual job itself. And then you're going to learn a bunch of these other things that might be
Mm.
behavioral or emotional or, even intellectual, right, in terms of
Mm.
the content. So all of those things I think are really important. And, that also then lends itself to, what can we do as individuals, right?
Mm.
As the work is shifting and changing,
Mm.
how do we become more employable,
Mm.
right? Because that's going to be a big struggle. And, there was this wonderful book written by Dr. Warner Burke out of Columbia, which
Mm.
talked about this. And it said, what brought you here won't get you there, right? It's
Yep.
kind of that whole idea that there's a big shift. And he kind of went on to talk about these behaviors and
Mm.
skills that are required, living in this VUCA world, right? This
Yep.
volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. And flexibility was the number one thing.
Mm.
Willing to try new things, right?
Mm.
And how quickly are you willing to grasp new
Mm.
information, new ideas? And I love this term about something that we've done recently at Compass, which is to get a product out there and just see, whether it works or it doesn't work, right? Does
Yeah.
it? If you fail fast, learn fast,
Mm.
right? So that you can keep adapting and keep modifying and developing things that
Mm.
kind of have some sort of positive impact in what you do.
Absolutely.
So
So,
that flexibility and speed are critical. Yeah.
so if we're talking about in terms of the now and the future of work, um, how can we adapt and equip our skills, knowledge, and abilities accordingly? What can we do?
Mm. So there's probably a few things, right? I mean, one is to have a think about what are the areas that you are really interested in, right? So, for example, imagine you're a pilot, right? And you're going through right now what's happening, and you see that perhaps there's going to be a drop in demand, right, for the work that you might do in the short term, right?
Yeah.
Short to medium term, there might be a drop. Hopefully, things will pick up again. But maybe as a pilot, you're somebody who really loves, design, right? You've always loved, the creative nature of design and how an airplane is built. Maybe there's a way of actually teaming up with a software company and, being a designer on a game, right? So as a
Mm.
pilot, you help design a game that teaches people how to fly in a virtual sense, right? Using new technology, whether it's 3D or artificial intelligence or whatever it might be. So trying to determine what is it that I'm interested in, what have I got some skills in that actually are relevant to what's going on,
Mm.
and where can I start to apply them, right, in a
Mm.
way that's practical. Of course, linking it back to some sort of technology, right?
Mm.
And I think, it's funny. We've had these three tiers of technology that have kind of been interesting, right? So we've got this assisted technology, which is like a typical GPS system, that kind of sits in your car. Then you have this sort of augmented, technology, which is, like the sharing, the Uber sharing sort of apps, that you have, that you can kind of use that to, maybe share a ride with somebody else, right?
Mm.
And then I was reading about this, obviously the autonomous type, sort of technology, which is, cars that drive themselves, right? And we're
Yep.
working our way through each of those three levels, right?
Mm.
And so if you were to look at where you would like to work, would you want to work in an environment, that is perhaps sitting in that middle range around augmented, around sharing knowledge and sharing experiences and doing those things?
Mm.
How would that work, right?
Mm.
I've just seen an Emirates employee who is a cabin crew, right, who was let go a few months ago. And she's now all over LinkedIn and Instagram as an individual who is actually setting up a social media company, right? So she's
Interesting.
so passionate about social media. She's passionate about helping people, right? It's one of the reasons she went into becoming cabin crew in the first place. She loves the idea of travel and new experiences and adventure. And so she's tried to bring that together. So she only works with companies who are travel companies and adventure companies, right? So it's bringing those kind of things together and using your brand in a way that puts you out to the world, right?
Mm.
And there are processes and tools that you can use to do that,
Okay.
that are out there. But I think it's important to understand what are those things first. Then how
Mm.
do I think about what is the technology? If this is what I'm trying to do, what is
Mm.
the technology out there that can support me to connect with other people to do that?
Okay.
Right?
So let's look at this a bit more. Now we're talking about, uh, so you took this example of the cabin crew, how she's used her experience being in the cabin crew and her passion for traveling and her love for social media and merging it together. So that's a great insight this particular individual has for herself.
Mm.
What about those people who are unaware of that insight about themselves? How do they discover that? Because that discovery is very essential before you go into this. We can all run into this fractional employment and into this gig economy, and yet
Yes.
we may be able to achieve something. Now let's
Mm.
go back. What is our core ability, our knowledge, and skill set that will allow us to get those projects out there? What insight does an individual need to do for themselves to discover all of this?
It's a great question. And the answer in a lot of ways sits under self-assessment, right? It's the introspection.
Mm.
And we need some tools, right? Some instruments to be able to allow us to do that, right?
Mm.
And so what you do, and you can do that either working with a career coach or through other products that are out there at the moment, is to actually go through a process of understanding what is important to me,
Mm.
right? What am I good at? Now, when you combine the things that you're good at and the things that you're interested in, right? Those are what we call motivated skills,
Yep.
right? And if you do more of those every day, the more happier you tend to be. That's just life, right? We all know that. We all know what that feeling is like. So understanding, and look, one simple way of doing that, right, to understand what those are, and you don't need to have a massive diagnostic tool,
Yes.
is to look at your best self stories, right? So what I mean by that is think back on your life and maybe identify 5 or 6 really important achievements that you've had,
Mm.
things that you're really proud of. What were those situations that you were in? What did you achieve during that time? What were some of the skills that you needed to demonstrate? What knowledge did you need to have, right, to be able to do that? Now, if you're finding it difficult to have that information, talk to people around you
Mm.
who know you and
Mm.
get some stories from them about you, right?
Mm.
Now, not only is it a wonderful story to lift your mood, because hopefully you're asking for good stories, right, of achievements and successes,
Mm.
and it's great to get that feedback, but it also sparks your memory, right,
Mm.
about certain things that you've achieved. And oh yeah, I do remember when I was, 19, that I did that presentation. It felt amazing being a part of that team. What was it about that team? That felt really good. What was it about that topic, right, that I really loved, right? Or when I was, 31 years old, and my first ever, I was the project manager for the first time, right? I had a budget that I needed to run, and the adrenaline was pumping, right? And I remember that feeling and that sense of accomplishment and achievement, through that. So we call this best self stories. It is a reflection process that you can go through, and you can get other people to help you as well, through that process. Yeah.
So that's one way of doing it. The second thing comes is we used to talk about personal branding. Could you give me a bit more detail for the people out there? I mean, what is personal branding? Because, okay, I see a lot of people talking about personal branding, and honestly, I see a lot of fashion and fad around it rather than actual substance. Yes, there are few people, and they don't necessarily define it as personal branding. They just define it as being yourself.
Yeah.
So how does a person, so think about it from a person, an individual who's like, oh my God, I need some work. I need to do introspection. I need to look at personal branding. I need to go out and search. How much time do I have? I need to take care of my health. I need to take care of my family. I need to pay my bills. Oh, crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of personal brand, right? No, I was just going to say that's the beauty of personal brand. It's all those things, right? It's actually just who we are. And I think we've managed to create such a complicated story, right, around what personal brand is. And, I see people, on an annual basis, they'll go through an experience where they'll just keep reinventing, their personal brand, right, and who they are. And at the core of who they are, not much has changed, right? But it's just difficult to get it out to people. And maybe it's difficult to talk to the right people who understand that language, right? Maybe it's about understanding, how do we articulate, right, what that is. Now, there's a saying in career coaching, and we talk about this all the time, that, introspection leads to articulation, right? And if you don't actually properly introspect, a lot of us think we do, we can't actually express ourselves clearly about who we are and what we stand for. Now, I think I completely agree with what you were saying, mate, around this or being authentic, right? We hear this word a lot, being genuine and authentic, right? What does that mean, right?
Yep.
It goes a lot back to our values and who we are. So if we don't know what are the values that are important to us, what are the internal and external motivators, intrinsic, extrinsic motivators that we have?
Yep.
How are we going to then know the kind of environments that are going to be important to us?
Yep.
Yeah. How are we going to know the right culture that's going to be important to us? All those things are really important. So I think we need to do that part first to then get a sense of what our brand is. We hear this word, the P word, purpose, all the time, right? Again, along with agile, it's one of the most overused words, and everyone has this. Yeah, that's right. It's one of those things where you think, okay, oh my God, I have to find a purpose. What is my purpose? I have one thing in my life that I'm living for. There's not one thing in your life, right, that you're trying to achieve. That doesn't make sense. How could that possibly make sense with the complexity that we have in our lives? Right?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I follow. So when I'm coaching, and I have no ICF accreditation, but I use different methods, and one of the methods which I use is the Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways by Susan Jeffers. And one of the most crucial things in that coaching method is your whole life grid.
Yes.
Okay, because there are different elements in your life. That's your inner core values. Then you've got your family, your hobbies, your career, your finance, your contribution. And there's a whole list of basically 9 things. And it's very, very clearly saying your purpose is not about just that one thing, but it's a multitude of things in different sectors. And if one thing is not working, you can focus on other things.
Yes.
And which is very interesting. You say how people talk about what is your purpose, they just focus on that one thing.
Mm.
And the question which comes out is, which I learned from another place, is rather than asking what you want, ask yourself the question, what is important to you?
Mm. Mm.
Because wants are endless. Yeah?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
want a Ferrari, I want a Lamborghini, I want to, own the whole of Burj Khalifa. Yeah. Wants are endless, but when you start focusing on important, you start getting a clarity on what your purpose is as a whole on different aspects.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think that that is, so I guess in a lot of ways, going back to understanding, what are your skills, what's your knowledge, how are you
Mm,
going to align that to the core sort of things that you want to give? I've
mm,
stopped talking about purpose. I've started talking about what do I want to give, right?
okay.
Because I find that very rarely do you want to give things that you don't want to give, right? You probably
Mm,
want to give things that make you happy, things that actually will hopefully help other people, right?
mm,
And this is about giving of yourself. I'm not talking about physical trinkets and
mm,
worldly possessions and that kind of thing, right? It's
mm.
a lot of that is your time, perhaps your wisdom, your skills, your knowledge, your experience. What is it of that that I want to
Yes.
give, right? And spend my time doing? Yeah. Um, so I
So,
think there's,
yeah.
yeah.
So sorry,
No,
please.
No, I was just going to say that I think that combination of those things, is really important, and that is about self-leadership, right? In
Mm,
lots of ways. I think we've got to become less reliant on what organizations are doing for us,
mm,
because they're going to be going down a different path. I mean, if anything, if we've seen anything over the last 5 to 6 months, is
mm,
that companies operate as machines. They
mm,
do things that are in their best self-interest,
mm,
right? In the same way, we also need to do things that are in our best self-interest, right? About protecting ourselves, the people we love, the communities we're in, how we connect to others. Those are things that are in our control. They're also in our self-interest, right? Because we know if you isolate yourself from your community, you have problems,
mm.
right? And so, we know we need to outreach and go out to people and have those conversations. And so that self-leadership is important. As a leader in a company,
Yep.
there's a lot of things that we need to do differently, right?
Mm,
And it's becoming very clear. In fact, I was just reading on this concept the other day about the idea of something you talk about a lot, mate, the sense of compassion and empathy.
mm,
How do we make sure that we demonstrate that compassion to people, um, not just on an individual basis, right? But how do we make sure your team, right, helps you as an individual so that we all account for each other? And
mm,
after a meeting, we can have 8 to 10 back-to-back meetings on Zoom, right? Who does that serve, right? And
mm,
how is it serving us? Maybe we need to change our behaviors.
mm.
And so that means not only us as individuals, but as teams and as leaders, we need to be changing those behaviors as well, right? So after the meeting, we've agreed on a bunch of behaviors. What is the check that 5 minutes after that meeting that we are demonstrating those behaviors?
Mm.
5 hours after that meeting, we're demonstrating those behaviors. 5 days after those meetings. And it's not just the individual responsibility, it's also the team's responsibility, right?
Okay.
To do that.
So looking at that, the now and future of work, how are leaders going to behave, or what would you recommend leaders to be behaving like in this now and future of work?
Yeah. I think probably the biggest thing which we've seen now is that the big problem that people have had is an element of letting go, right? Of control, right? We've kind of seen that come up a lot. I mean, if you'd gone and told us how many government departments are going to be working online, right, or virtually in April, if I'd asked you that question a year ago, you said, no way, that's not going to happen, right? And every single one did it, right? And in a lot of ways, they did it successfully, right?
Mm,
As in stuff got done. The issue is, what is the medium to long-term impact? right, of isolating people in that sense. So I think as leaders, going back to your question, Rohit, I think as leaders, we have a responsibility to ensure the level of engagement and trust and connection is allowed as a team, right?
Mm,
What are we doing to make sure that we are getting our people to connect with each other, not just on back-to-back Zoom calls? That's not connection.
mm,
That's a transaction, right? And so we need to think through what else am I putting in place, to
mm,
do that. And so, we've got, companies at the moment who've set up little coffee sessions together where no work, pure personal, right? Now, some people dial in, some people don't, right? Some people have never liked to disclose personal information,
yes.
in a work context. So it's not like we're trying to force people now to do that. It's not natural and it's not something that they want to do,
Well,
right?
it's funny you say that. In some companies, they're actually forcing people to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like there's one way to do things and one way to manage people and lead
Yeah,
people, which we know simply doesn't make sense. Even if you just use a situational leadership style approach, doesn't make sense, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Um, yeah, so that's
So,
interesting. Mm.
so looking at all of this,
Mm.
how do soft skills stack up in this new world order which we're in now?
Yeah, you know, for me, it starts with the soft skills. um, and the way that we can use technology should support the development of these soft skills and the magnification, right, of these soft skills. So what I mean by that is, if one of the core skills that you need in a really complex world is collaboration, right, or feedback, right,
Mm,
how are we using technology to feed back to each other,
mm,
right, in a way that's really effective? And I think that that's really important. How do we share the right information with each other,
mm,
to be able to do that? Because sending an email saying, I thought your tone of voice was really rude in that last Zoom call, probably isn't going to have the same impact, right? As perhaps having a conversation with somebody in a video context, right? If we have to not physically be in the office, right?
yeah. I mean, I find the word soft skills very demeaning, as it's shouldn't. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we could just change that to essential skills?
Yes. You know what, actually, Rohit? Why don't we? Let's do it. Let's start a movement towards moving away from that, because I think you're absolutely right.
Mm,
And in fact, most of the reports, whether it's the World Economic Forum, whether it's Deloitte, um, these companies are mostly talking about these essential skills,
mm,
because that is where there's a direct relationship between that and your mental health. And if your mental health is not right, your productivity is low, and your ability to be able to function as a community or a society is also diminished, right?
mm.
So that has an impact. So, you know what? You and me will start that now. It's now
Essential
essential
skills.
skills. Great idea. Great
Well,
idea.
I think we should write to all these people who do all these analysis. Can we just call them essential skills, not soft skills, to start off with?
Absolutely.
You know,
Well, the
uh,
other thing which I thought was interesting was this concept. I was talking to my brother-in-law about this the other day, saying, we've got IQ, we have EQ, we have SQ, spiritual intelligence, we have CQ, cultural intelligence, right? What about MQ? That is monetizing quotient, right? It's actually saying, how do I take my brand and create a livelihood out of
I
it?
need a lot of that.
Well, we all do. It's a completely different skill set, right? And it's things that you can learn. In the old days, we used to say IQ couldn't be changed. It was fixed, right? What your IQ was at age 21 is what it was when you passed away, right? Which we know is not true. You can
Mm,
increase your IQ, right, over time. In the same way, you can learn how to be more culturally appropriate, right, and intelligent, to be more socially or spiritually intelligent, right, to be more emotionally intelligent. If you can learn to improve in all those aspects, if the world of work is moving towards an environment where we are going to be almost individuals selling ourselves in an entrepreneurial sense, right,
yep.
then we also need to learn how to manage and monetize our brand, right? And that, I think that requires a level of intelligence as well that perhaps we're not taught and we need to learn. right?
It's interesting you say that. I was in the beginning of the year, I was talking to a client, and the client was telling me at university, one of the projects which they did was they had to create some kind of product, and then the professor asked them, "What is the price of this which you will sell at?"
Mm.
And they were a bit lost, and they quoted a very low price. He said, "So you're telling me all the time and the effort and the experience you put into this product is worth nothing?"
Mm.
They reevaluated it, and they looked and they increased the price significantly. He said, "Now you understand the importance of
Yeah,
the value you put in terms of money terms as well." It's very
absolutely.
interesting because when that client, when we was talking to that particular client, when he said that, he asked me, "What is your pricing?"
Mm.
And I told them what my pricing was. And they said to me, "Isn't that too much?"
Yeah,
And I related it back to his professor's story. He said, "I understand where you're coming from. Um, I'm
yeah,
happy with the price. Although, can we have a little bit of negotiation to shift it a little bit?" Which I was open to. But again, it was
absolutely.
monetizing that particular value which you give to the
And I,
person. Uh,
and I think they're all connected, right?
yeah.
So um, the thing about money I find is it's an emotional, they're emotional triggers, right? That are linked to money. And so whether you're the buyer, right, or you are the seller of that service, there's an emotion attached to that. So if
Mm,
you're the seller, you've put all this time and energy, right, into this product and learning about the product and you want to get it out there. Um, Maybe it's your brand that you're trying to sell,
yeah.
right, to get some work. And the buyer is like, well, why do I want to part with this when I'm not clear about what I'm getting, right? And what the value is and so
Mm,
forth. So it's that constant kind of interplay that needs to. So going back to your question, we need to be clear about what our brand is. We're moving into this not impermanent sort of work arrangement, over the next 3 to 5 years in particular,
mm,
where a lot of jobs, you're not going to see permanent roles being labeled, right, on job ads, right? That's probably going to become very, very limited, right?
mm.
Which is very uncomfortable for a lot of people, right? I was talking to my father about this, in that generation, permanency was everything, right?
It, it's strange you're talking about this, is because if you look at the evolution of humankind, we started off, you could say, in a gig economy or fractional economy. And then
That's
we
true.
moved into permanency. And now we're going back into that fractional and gig side again. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
of what's happening around us. There is a question by Heron, which I'll bring up in a while, Heron. Um,
Mm.
here's one thing: is you have worked on something which is called the Kickstart series. What is
Yes.
that all about?
Well, we've been reflecting a lot over the last 5 6 months, and I know you have significantly as well in terms of what is needed out there right now. And we wanted to bring to the world a virtual video series that was about 4 hours of total content that is available online that helps you to find a job, right?
Beautiful.
Because right now we know people are struggling, right? And there are a lot of people who are either wanting to make a transition, maybe they found themselves out of a job, maybe they're graduating, right? And they're trying to look at the next opportunity. How do you use a structure or a system to do that? Now, one of the things that you and I spoke about was self-assessment. We cover that in that topic.
Mm,
But what's wonderful about this, and I've received a lot of flack from people, other career coaches actually, over the last week, who have actually said to me, "Why are you doing this? Aren't you
really?
diminishing? Aren't you reducing your income?" Right? Because we're selling it at, instead of $2,500 at $200, right? It's available online, and you get sample CVs, you get interview guides, 150 questions, you get all sorts of downloadable stuff that you would normally have to engage with somebody over a longer period of time to get.
Mm,
So we have sort of shifted in some ways, um, what people need, what we
mm,
think people need right now at this time,
mm,
based on what we've experienced, right? And so the Kickstarter series was to get people kickstarted in the right way. to be able to find the jobs that they need. And it's basically a video conversation between myself and Peter Hill, who is, one of the top global career
Yes.
coaches. He's in Honolulu recording it, and I was in Sydney, having a conversation, which is amazing. And we use this, talking about technology that helps you, this platform called Kajabi, which I,
Yes.
stumbled upon, thanks to some of our marketing team. And they found this system that is just wonderful, that allows you to be able to integrate all this online learning, which is great. So, that's where Kickstarter has come from. It's come out of a need that we believe right now people need access to information on how to get Kickstarter to finding a job. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly a requirement, because for people who have been in permanent roles and now they're in a position where we're talking about a fractional economy, a gig economy, this is something which they need to look at. Simple as that. And what I've noticed is with people who have been in a permanent role for a long time, they are unaware of how to approach the market.
Yes.
And where you brought up the point of how do I show them my skills, my knowledge, my abilities? How do I portray my personal branding to them? So I think this is a great thing which you and your colleague has done, which is wonderful. The question by Haran, which comes up, he says, Rohit Gaj, you mentioned giving and sharing of knowledge. What are your thoughts on being viewed as a threat to others within a company when you try to share your talents? Oh, this is a beautiful question. Beautiful question.
That's a good question from Aaron there. Absolutely, it can be perceived, right, as a very threatening thing when you do have information, knowledge that, and where the threat comes from is where someone feels like something is being taken away from them as a result of that, right? So if they're losing something, typically power, and power, knowledge is associated with power, as we all know. And so when you're imparting knowledge and that individual then believes that is taking away perhaps some of their power, some of their knowledge, some of their status within that team or that group, then that can have a massive impact, on them as well. And so sharing knowledge can be done in so many ways. And, I've got a number of coachees who actually stopped sharing knowledge directly with teams because of that. So what they did is they did it indirectly. So they actually went and did it through another channel like LinkedIn. So they put out the same information, right? But they put it to 10,000 people rather than to 10 people. And then when people asked for it, they actually just said, well, there's actually something that I put up the other day about this on a very individual basis, so that they were actually still able to share, still able to put information out to the world, but they were not doing it in such a perceived threatening way, right, to individuals. The other is to also to sit down with that individual and to see how you can support them, right? You tend to find that there is usually some disconnect when someone perceives a threat, right, within the business. And like you and I have both worked in corporate environments, and we know what this environment is like. And I'm sure the question is coming, from that kind of mindset as well. And so, it's very much around how do you do that in the best way to sit down with individuals to understand their motivation, their values, their drivers. Yeah. Sorry.
It's interesting you say that, because I've come across this issue in the past, and without mentioning which role and what year, I've been on LinkedIn for a long time, and I saw that an issue in one of the organizations I worked with, and so I would do what you're saying, isn't it? Just like put a small post up on LinkedIn at that time. And LinkedIn wasn't that advanced even at that time, but it had some good features where you could at least write some posts or whatever, just simple posts. Nowadays you can do articles, videos, God knows what else. I recall the managing director bringing me into the room and saying, I know what you're doing. How dare you post all this information on LinkedIn?
Wow.
And I was like, I beg your pardon? And he said, you should not be sharing information like this to everyone. I said, this is nothing to do with the organization itself. This is industry knowledge.
Mm.
So bear in mind what you've said. This is also a possible thing which could possibly happen, because I've experienced it myself. Or
Absolutely.
so just need to be aware of that, Haran. Is like, yes, great, go out there, give that information. At the other end, some people feel so threatened by you that they may actually come back and you say what was said to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, I think it's a great question, and something that a lot of us face, particularly, and whether you are working as a permanent employee or whether you're coming in as a consultant, right? Stuff that we say to people can be deemed to be threatening because it challenges typically a deep value set that they have, right? So if we understand what that is, then we can probably navigate around that a little bit as well, right? And kind of address that to some extent. Yeah.
To close off, in regards to how, in the environment which we're in, how is one going to find ways to manage their emotions, the mental toughness? Is that what you call it?
Yes.
How can one do that? Because there are people who they've lost their jobs. There are people who have literally their salaries have been reduced by half. And then there are people who businesses have just toppled. How do they emotionally, mentally move on in such a economy across the globe, which we're living through at the moment?
Well, it's a good question, and it's a really.
I just want to say my other questions were not good.
No, this one was really good. So look, I think, Roy, one of the key things about this is that when people go through these kind of challenges, right? We need a framework sometimes that we can pin all these things to, right? Otherwise, we just got all these fluid thoughts that are just swimming around in our heads that can create sometimes a lot of confusion, right?
Yes.
And there is a model that you and I have spoken about on a previous discussion around mental toughness, and one of those elements is around control. And what is in my control? And we mentioned it earlier in this discussion today. Going back to a situation where we've got client organizations where you're right, salaries are cut by half, right? Their leave entitlements are gone.
Yeah.
But school fees still need to get paid. Electricity bills still need to get paid. Mortgages still need to get paid. Car payments still need to get paid. And in a world like that, we go back to this idea of, well, what is in my control here, right? And this is where, when we start to look at what is happening in the world, what is in your control is thinking through, well, if I've just got one revenue stream or income stream, that's a pretty dangerous situation to be in, right? It's pretty vulnerable, right? Imagine just having, as an organization, one customer, right? It just wouldn't make sense. It's not sustainable in case anything happened to that customer. And this is where, because we are shifting this way, thinking through what can I do now to kind of manage this? Going back to what's in my control can be a great way of reminding ourselves, right, around that. Second thing is surrounding yourself with good people. Now, the research is so clear on this, right? The more people that you surround yourself with, that give you that positive energy, the opportunity to vent when you're feeling down or angry or frustrated, the people that are able to perhaps give you some counsel, right, when you need to, having 3 or 4 people around you, right? We don't need a football team, of people there to support us, right? It's a very small number that are there at any time. I know if I'm going through a hard time, I can simply WhatsApp you, Rohit, and you're always there for me, mate. I know that, right? And there's a few people around in different parts of the world that are like that for me. And I'm sure you've got that for yourself. And I think that helps, to get through those times. So support, knowing what's in your control, right? And then setting a little micro goal each day, right? So what is something that you're going to do that could either give you a sense of happiness, something that you can achieve, right? That's going to help you, right? It could be about, I'm going to spend, 45 minutes or an hour, just out in the garden, right? Or
Mm.
painting something, right?
Mm.
I've never seen so many of these mandala, those
Yeah,
diagram, the coloring things on Instagram than I have in the last 5 months, right? Seems like everyone's getting into them. There's an element of focus and control, and we're bringing all of our attention into this one place, right?
Mm.
And so, I think that's really helpful to be able to do that. And it's just those small things that
Mm.
can have a big impact, and it's a
Mm.
combination of those small things that can have a big impact on
Mm.
us. I don't think there is a golden ticket, that allows us to do that. I think that's part of the suffering that we sometimes need to go through to get to a better place, right?
Mm.
I don't think anyone's actually ever achieved a good place without suffering, right? And so anyway, for what it is, that's my kind of take on things. So what's in your control? The element of having people around you that can be helpful. I think are really critical.
Thank you so much, Gaj. For people out there who are listening to you, who will listen to this recording, how do they get in touch with you? How do they contact you?
Skywriting is a very good way of getting in touch with me. I'll just look up to the stars and hopefully find a message, a bat signal.
I was thinking bat signal. I was thinking that. I was thinking looking into the moon and
Yes.
The old traditional way.
Or you could just go to compassconsultancy.com.
Now, whoa, that is amazing. Can we do that?
Technology. Or go to on LinkedIn, Gaj Ravichandra. I'm there. I actually personally respond to all the messages. It's not an Autobot that does that for you. So it's look, very happy to help and support people.
Compassconsultancy.com. The K starts with a K, not a C. Compass with
that's
a K.
correct.
Compassconsultancy.com. On LinkedIn, Gaj Ravichandra, they can hook up with you over there, and you personally answer all the messages. Thank you so much. We've got a message again from her saying, this was extremely useful and helpful. I've got 3 pages of notes as it was so relevant. Thank you for your insight, knowledge, and platform. Have a lovely day. Thank you so much, Aaron. Really appreciate it. So,
wonderful. Thank you.
That's beautiful. Really appreciate your time today with us, Gaj. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. And thank you to all the listeners.
Thank you, mate, for continuing this journey and your commitment. It's people are going to look back on this. Actually, if they're not enjoying this now, they're going to look back on this and get immense value from all the diversity of knowledge that you are putting into this platform. So thank you, mate. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's good to talk to someone who, George Clooney stole your looks. Brad Pitt is your preferred client. Yeah.
And he stole my money as well, George Clooney. He's just terrible.
Jesus Christ. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. See you at the next show, next interview on Raw Life. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.